Good morning to everyone. Happy Friday. I'll be doing a presentation on growing your own Irish potato. So I'll say a few things. I think the potato and growing potatoes in specific is probably very misunderstood. Um, I hope I give everyone a lot of information, but mostly I hope I inspire you guys to consider growing the Irish potato in your home garden. It's a good selection for something. It's easy to do, and I'll hopefully educate you a bit going forward today. So if I asked everyone, how do you grow a potato? My guess would be that 50% of you would say that they're grown from a seed. The other 50% would say potatoes don't have seeds. And I'll leave that alone. Hopefully you'll get the answer to what I just said as I move forward with the presentation, but kind of highlights maybe some of the misperceptions of a potato and how potatoes grown. Let's see here. Okay, so we'll kick into the presentation. The Inca Indians in Peru were the first to cultivate potatoes. It goes back, it was actually one of the first foods that were cultivated all the way from 8,000 BC to 5,000 BC, so an extremely long time ago. The first permanent potato patches in North America were established in 1719, most likely in New Hampshire by Scottish-Irish immigrants. Hence, probably the name Irish potato and where it originated from. Potatoes, the world's fourth largest food crop. So it follows only rice, wheat, and corn. There are more than 4,000 varieties of native potatoes. Most of these are found in the Andes Mountains. One of the interesting things about the Andes Mountains is it's a location that's very cool all year and a place that also doesn't freeze. So it's the perfect environment for potatoes. They grow wild there. Most of the varieties you can't or wouldn't eat. But nonetheless, there are a whole bunch of varieties. There's about 200 varieties sold in the US, and I would say most that are on this call have probably seen or be exposed to less than 10 varieties. So huge variety out there that we're really not exposed to, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that going forward. Idaho is the largest producer of potatoes in the United States. No surprise there, as you always hear the Idaho potato. And this very interesting, the average American eats around 125 pounds of potatoes or potato products a year. And I know for certain I do my part in the 125 pounds. So I like to throw in a little bit of nutrition or fitness into some of my presentations. And one of the interesting things of the 125 pounds that are consumed, 2/3 of this is consumed with processed potatoes. So not fresh potatoes, potato chips, French fries. 2/3 of it is probably eaten in a way that's not healthy for you. So potatoes, they're a wonderful home garden selection. The difference in taste between a store-bought potato and one that you grow, I think, and most people who've grown them would say it's very dramatic. I'm also a tomato lover, in addition to a potato lover. And I would say probably as all the veggies I've ever grown, the potato and the tomato have probably the most dramatic differences in flavor between homegrown or store-bought. Store-bought potatoes are also on the EPA's Dirty Dozen list, which that is a list of the 12 vegetables or produce that has the most residual pesticides. So that alone may be a motivation for you to give growing potatoes at home a try. A little background on why that is. So the commercially grown potatoes, generally while they're growing, they're sprayed with a fungicide during the growing season. Once they become mature and they're ready for harvest, the whole field is sprayed with an herbicide to kill the vine to make harvesting easier. So after they spray with a herbicide, then the vine dies, and then they come in with the harvesting machines. They pick up the potatoes. And then once the potatoes are harvested, they are put in storage and they're sprayed with a sprout inhibitor so that they can store for an extended period and won't sprout. Most potatoes that are grown in the north, they're a cool weather crop. I'll get into that. They're grown in the north, and they're all harvested pretty much in the month of September and October. So they have to store all the potatoes all year long, and you're getting potatoes that have been sitting in some kind of a storage facility, and they ship them to all the grocery stores year round, but they're not harvested fresh. You may get something that's a 9-month or 10-month-old potato, so it's not a very fresh product when it's in the grocery store. In general, potatoes are very easy to grow. They have few pests and problems to contend with. They have a very efficient production. So you get a lot of food out of a very small amount of seed or planting. The average yield per pound of seed potatoes planted is 10 pounds. The last 2 years, I've gotten right around 14 pounds. So I've been happy with that, obviously doing something right. Each potato plant should produce 2 pounds of potatoes on average. So you can see clearly for every 1 pound you plant, getting 2 pounds of production makes this a very neat vegetable to grow in your backyard. Nutritionally. So nutritionally, you know, there's a myth out that you hear, or I've heard quite a bit anyway, that potatoes are not very nutritious. And that's actually not true at all. Potatoes are an excellent source of vitamin C, a good source of potassium, in fact, more than a banana. And bananas kind of considered the benchmark of potassium amongst fruits and vegetables. Also a good source of vitamin B6, very nutrient dense, complex carbohydrates. So they get a bad rap of being a carbohydrate, which is true. But the good side is it's a complex carbohydrate, which essentially means that it takes your body longer to break it down. Because it takes your body longer, it doesn't have necessarily that sugar spike that you would get on eating a simple carbohydrate. It also we get all of our energy from carbohydrates. So a complex carbohydrate is really good because it's a slow burn of giving you a little bit of fuel at a time. Very high in fiber, which is a great thing. Fat, sodium, cholesterol free, and only 110 calories. So in all honesty, it is a very healthy veggie. Also a myth that I've heard stated many times before is that all the vitamins are in the skin, and that's not an accurate statement either. The skin does contain the majority of fiber, and the skin also contains the majority of iron, but the inside of the potato is really where the most nutrition is. So growing characteristics, as I stated earlier, potatoes are a cool weather crop. They should be planted when the soil warms above 50 degrees. Once the soil warms above 80, the formation of tubers or the potatoes themselves ends. So we have a very short growing season in and around Houston, Galveston area. About May, we're at 80 degrees and potato formation and growing the potato is done. So we really have a very short season to where the winter's coming to an end and it's warm enough to grow, and summer's kicking in and it's 80 degrees, so our season is very short. One of the good things is, though, we can grow 2 crops per year. So we can grow 1 crop in the spring and another in the fall. Potatoes grow best in a slightly acid conditions, so pH somewhere between 5 and 6.5. The normal pH we have around here is closer to 6.5, and I'll talk a little bit more about pH and some things we can do with it later in the presentation. Potatoes require full sun, loose, well-drained soil with good amounts of organic matter. And finally, potatoes are heavy feeders and require very good fertilization. Also make the comment while I'm going through the presentation, please get in the chat and type any questions you might ask. I'd much rather have questions going through the presentation. For one, to know I've got some live bodies out there who are still listening. It kind of helps with engagement here. So please don't feel bad about writing in the chat. So a little breakdown of the potato. Okay, hang on. I do have a question. So when do you plant potatoes in the Austin area? So great question, and I am going to answer that in a couple more slides. So hang in there. So the potato, there's pretty easy plant to diagnose. There's leaves, there's a stem, there's roots, there's stolons. So stolons are rhizomes, which connect the potato, which are referred to as tubers. Many people think that the potato is actually a root, and it's not a root. So it's they do have a root system, but they put out stolons. Stolons, think about a ginger plant. A ginger is a rhizome, and the stolon is a rhizome as well. And one of the interesting things, the potato is actually a concentration of nutrients. It's a storage piece. So it's built that way so that it can continue reproducing itself and make it across winter, and then next year produce itself all over again. So hence one of the reasons why it's nutritious. It actually stores all the nutrition underground as it prepares to die and then reproduce itself again. So pretty interesting how it supports itself. Okay, let's see. I have a question on, can you address the production of organic store-bought potatoes? Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So organic store-bought potatoes, they do not use many of the fungicides. They certainly don't use the herbicides to kill the vine. And they don't use any of the sprouts. So everything I said on the commercial production is not used in organic. Now, the downside is, and why you don't see it a lot in stores, is they can't store the potato very long at all. So that's one of the major downsides of it. It's also much more difficult for them to get a good harvest. It's also much more difficult for them to get a common size of a potato. So a little bit's driven by the public, and the public always wanting to go in the grocery store and seeing a perfectly formed vegetable or fruit. And if it's not perfectly formed or it's got a blemish, people turn away from it and don't buy it. So that's the difference you're going to get with organic and some of the commercial stuff. It's a trade-off between having a perfectly formed fruit or vegetable and one that doesn't have additives to it that allow them to be more successful doing it. Another question, how do nutrients of potatoes compare to sweet potatoes? We're not talking about sweet potatoes in this one, but I can tell you that a sweet potato is more nutritious than a Irish potato. Are fingerling potatoes considered an Irish potato? Yes, they are, and we're going to touch on fingerling potatoes in the future as well, so hold that thought. All right, so we'll move on. So those of you who grow tomatoes, you probably know the terms indeterminate and determinate. Those same terms apply to potatoes, and that's something I didn't know until actually recently, about a year ago. But it's pretty critical once you understand the difference between indeterminate and determinate and know they apply to potatoes as to why we have certain growing characteristics here. So potatoes, like tomatoes, they come in both determinate and indeterminate varieties. Essentially, this kind of determines your growth habits. So a determinate variety are early maturing varieties of potatoes. They tend to fruit all at once, and they are preferred in the Gulf Coast region. So, and I would go further, although I put preferred in my presentation, it's pretty much mandatory. These are the only potatoes that we can grow in the Gulf Coast. And as I said before, potatoes, you plant them when your soil gets to be about 50, and they're harvested when soil is about 80. So for the spring crop, that's generally the end of February, and you're harvesting at the end of May. So if you get a very late maturity variety, it's not going to make it that long, and you're going to have very small potatoes. So we're really limited to growing determinate varieties that have early maturity dates. And I'm going to talk more about those varieties and get in more detail. Indeterminate, late maturity varieties. So think about the russet potato, the big bakers, the Idaho bakers that you see in a grocery store. Those are indeterminate varieties. It generally takes about 130 to 140 days from planting to harvest. The determinate varieties that we can grow here, for the most part, are anywhere from 70 to 90 days from planting to harvest. So big difference. We can't grow indeterminate varieties here. They won't work. They tend to fruit over a long period of time, and they require a long and cool growing season. They don't produce well in the Gulf Coast. So a couple questions. Let me see. If I use last year's small potatoes that are now sprouting, how productive would my plants be? And they will be fine. They will be fantastic if you use last year's. And we're going to talk about planting a little bit, so I'll get in more detail about that. And then, oh, you responded. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Thanks, Ginger. So talk more about determinate potatoes. So almost all commercial potatoes grown in the U.S. are determinate potatoes. So they're short term between plant to harvest. They have been bred to produce at a particular time, so an entire field can be harvested at once. So part of the breeding process is to help with the commercial growers. They want to come in and harvest all at one time. They don't want to go in their fields and harvest a little 1 week, wait 2 more weeks, go in, harvest a little bit more. It's much more effective for them to harvest all at one time. So that's typically the choice of potatoes that are done. It's interesting, the russet potatoes, the large bakers, they're indeterminate. And so one of the reasons they're sprayed with an herbicide to kill the vine is they will continue to grow. And the commercial producers don't want them to continue to grow. They want to harvest them all at one time. So they allow it to grow. It gets to a size that they're comfortable with. They spray it with a herbicide, they kill the vine, and then they come back and they harvest it. So even the commercial growers that grow indeterminate varieties don't really allow the indeterminate varieties to do what they can do. They actually kill them before they have a chance to continue growing. So due to our short cool season, determinate potato varieties are the only ones that should be grown. Determinate varieties, like determinate tomatoes, the plant will only grow to a certain size, and the potato production will only put out a certain amount of potatoes kind of all at one time. They will go in one layer. An indeterminate variety will continue to put layers of potatoes up the stem as it keeps growing. Determinate varieties put one layer on the stem one time, and that's it. So it will grow from 3 to 6 inches above the seed potato. So wherever you plant your seed potato, the new potatoes will grow 3 to 6 inches above that point. So it kind of answers one of the questions is, how do you grow a potato? Is it from seed? It is from seed, but the primary way that a potato is grown is from seed potatoes, actually pieces of a potato that you would plant they're an exact clone of that potato plant. So determinate potatoes will not produce any additional stolons at or above the initial green shoots of the plant. So once you see the top of your potato plant coming out of the ground, that's it. That is the top of where it can actually put a potato on. It will not grow if you cover it with dirt. it will not put potatoes on above that point. Now I've got some pictures to kind of highlight that a little bit better. So common potatoes in our area. So these are the varieties. Red Norland, and you can see days to maturity, 70 to 90. It's an early season. It's determinate. Red Lesota is probably the potato variety that most are most familiar with in this area and what most farmers and backyard gardeners grow. It's 85 to 95 days, mid-season variety. Red Pontiac is 90 days plus, mid-season variety. Russian banana, which is also a fingerling, that was asked early. And there's a few other fingerlings, but probably the Russian banana is the most popular. It's 90 days plus, it's a mid-season as well. White Kennebec, 80 plus days mid-season, and in Yukon Gold, it's more of a gold yellow potato, 70 to 90 days. It's an early to mid-season, and it's also determinate. So I would suggest these are the types of potatoes and varieties you'll find in our area that you can actually purchase and plant. There may be others, but these are the primary ones that most people do and have had success with, and that I would say you will have success with growing in your backyard as well. So a little bit of extra info in each one of these. Red Norland, it was developed in 1965 in Nebraska. It's a very early variety. It's red, round, skin thin, thin-skinned, and it's kind of what you would think of as the new potato. So when you hear of new potato or you see that in the grocery store, this is one of the varieties of new potatoes. One of the interesting points is that it typically produces good yields, but less than the Pontiac or Lesota. So that's one thing to consider if you were going to plant it. If you know that you can get a variety that's very similar in taste, similar in texture, like Pontiac and Lesota, why would you plant the Red Northern versus planting the Pontiac or Lesota? They're probably better choices. The Red Northern is known for its good flavor, and it and all other red potatoes are very low in starch. So they're great for boiling, good for home fries, soups, roasting, pan fried, potato salads. So one thing about any red potatoes, as you cook them, they hold together. They have a very high specific gravity, and they're very moist and wet and dense. So they'll hold together. If on the contrasting that to the russet big baking potatoes, they have a lot of starch, the most starchy potato, and they're also very dry, which also allows them to bake much better and to be maybe more of that kind of a bakey, falling apart potato. If you put one of those russet potatoes to boil, it'll fall all apart. The skins come apart. They come apart in pieces, where the red potatoes hold together really well. So different uses for different potatoes on how you would cook with them successfully. Red Norland are pretty difficult to find locally. I've seen them, but they're not one that you would see that's very popular. So a little tough to get. The Red Pontiac originated in Florida in 1945. And you know, it's always a good sign when a variety of fruit or vegetable originated in the South, that they will generally be a good choice to grow them in the South. So again, it's a red, round, thin-skinned new potato type. Very high yields are produced with the Red Pontiac. Low in starch as well. And again, the same, it's great for boiling, home fries, soups, the same as what you'd see with all red skinned potatoes. They are fairly difficult to find, but I have seen them around locally. So not something you won't be able to see, but you might have to go make a few phone calls and go looking. Red Lesota. So Red Lesota is probably the most popular. It was developed by LSU in 1953. So once again, if it's being developed in the South, a next door neighbor state, got to be a good choice, and it is a good choice. Again, they produce really high yields, widely adapted, and a reliable potato that can withstand heat, cold, and also drought really well. So it's a pretty all-around potato that's easy to grow. Again, it resists a lot of things, so you'll have good success growing with it. It's also the best storing potato. So it will store better than the two other red potatoes that I mentioned previously. It is low in starch, like all red potatoes. And again, boiling, home fries, the same uses that you and ways that you would cook with it. It's readily available. This is probably the red potato you'll find most frequently if you're looking to find one to grow. Now you're moving into a little bit different variety, the white Kennebec. So one of the most popular home gardener grown potatoes is the white Kennebec. It is white skin, you can see in the picture, white flesh, and you have typically very high yields on this one as well. And it's one of the best all-purpose potatoes. So it's got a much higher starch content than the reds. So that leads it to be a little bit fluffier, more apt to being good to bake. So you can see now, great for boiling, good for mashed, fried, baked. It's got more uses, ways to cook it that it's positive. And it's very available in our area. I've seen it many different places. And finally, the Yukon Gold. So Yukon Gold was released in Canada in 1981. It's a favorite amongst potato growers as well. It's a large, thin, white skin and very white flesh. It's got an even higher starch content. And it lends itself well also to any method of cooking. It's favored by top chefs for making mashed potatoes because it has a higher starch content. It's much creamier. And I find I've grown Yukon, I've grown Kennebec, and I've grown all the reds, and without a doubt, it's definitely a lot creamier. This one can be difficult to find locally. I have seen it around, but it's not that easy to find, not readily available. And finally, the Russian Fingerling. So it's an heirloom potato, originally from the Baltic region of Europe. Produces very heavy production, widely adapted, very drought tolerant, 2 to 4 inches long, thin skin, creamy flesh, great for potato salads and roasting. Also favored by top chefs for roasting. And this one's very difficult to find locally. So that's kind of the ones that are probably the better choices for anyone that wants to grow them in their backyard. We're going to be selling at our Master Gardener sale. We're going to be selling the Yukon Gold. We're going to be selling the Kennebec, and we're also going to be selling the Lesotas. So we'll have 3 different varieties to choose from, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation. Oh, I see someone commented that the Yukon Gold, they are available at Home Depot. So that's great. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well, where to get them. So beginning the planting process. So the first thing you have to do is choose what variety you're gonna grow. The list I gave before should be something to base what you want to grow. And it's really on a personal decision on your taste and your preferences. They're all great varieties. All of them are tried and proven in this area. So they're all good choices. So as far as choosing what time, for a spring crop, you generally try to target planting 3 weeks before the last frost. So going by a holiday, I've always targeted Valentine's Day. So February the 14th, that's generally a good time. You can plant a little bit before, you can plant a little bit after. This is not a magic date. It's just a good target date. So you remember this is a good time to go. In general, I think our last freeze or frost comes around the 2nd or 3rd week of February. So if you look at Valentine's Day as a time to plant, your potatoes will actually be in the ground. And if we do get a frost, generally takes about 2 weeks before the potatoes come up. So they're coming up pretty close to around that first frost date. So you should be in good shape, but you may have to cover them because we've been known to have frost a little bit later. Too early, and you probably, if we do have a frost, it can be completely detrimental to the plant because they're not, any cold weather will wipe them out. Fall crop. So you can, as I said before, we can do 2 crops here. So generally you target planting 110 days before the first expected frost. And that target date is more like September the 1st. I can tell you this year, I planted a fall crop and we had an early frost in November, and it knocked my plants completely out. And I'll show you a picture a little bit later. Was able to harvest, but they were all small because they needed probably another 3 to 4 weeks of growth to get really to the to where we were targeting. So, you know, the frost on the front end, the frost on the back end can be really detriment. So it's really playing a game with both of those. So acquiring seed potatoes. So the first thing I want to say is you should look for certified disease-free potatoes. That's critical. Galveston Master Gardener Sale is where you can buy them. We sell them every year. Primarily in the past, we've sold just red Lesotos because that's been the one that the variety that most people like. This year we're adding more varieties, and hopefully in the future, depending on how adapted they are and how people take to it, we'll even add some additional varieties in the future. We'll see. Local feed stores, I think, are a great place to look. Garden centers are good, but I would caution you on garden centers like the Home Depots. They can also have varieties that don't grow well here. So when Home Depot places their orders, they place big giant orders for certain varieties and they ship them to their stores all over the place. And some of the varieties that may end up in some of their stores locally aren't good varieties that would grow well here. So be very cautious if you're going to buy it from any of the garden centers or the Home Depots, big box stores, and it's not going to be one of the varieties that I stated. You need to really look into it, make sure they're early season varieties and that they're adapted to the South and the weather that we have here. And finally, probably the last place is going to online seed catalogs for some of the same reasons. They're going to have a whole bunch of varieties that look neat. The write-ups are going to be great, but they're not going to be successful in our environment. So you need to be very careful with that. Also, sometimes the online seed catalogs, they won't ship it to you in January or February when you want it. They try to wait till a later time, and that'll be beyond the time that you need. So just be careful with where you get your seed potatoes. Do not use store-bought potatoes. So they are treated with sprout inhibitors, and they also may have disease, and that includes even the organics. So you can utilize store-bought organic potatoes if necessary, but that should be your absolute last resort, because although they won't have sprout inhibitors, they can still carry disease from wherever they were grown. And we'll talk some more about disease, specifically scab and some other things. So you really don't want to use that if you can avoid it, and really hone in on some of your local feed stores, the Galveston County sales, and the garden centers. So the next step in your process, once you've identified the variety you buy, you know when you're going to plant it, and you bought your seed potatoes, it's called chitting. So chitting is a process of encouraging the potatoes to sprout before planted. So it's a process that's not mandatory, but it can be beneficial. So I wanted to at least point that out in this presentation. The challenge we have with chitting is chitting generally takes 4 to 6 weeks, which means you'd have to buy your potatoes at the beginning of January, certainly early January for here. And most places, or many places, don't have potatoes available at that time. So it can be a challenge getting potatoes. If you want to do chitting and you do find potatoes early enough, it's really great. It gives you a super jump start. So all it is kind of encouraging the potato to sprout before being planted. And I'll talk a little bit more about how you do it on the next slide. So the question, to chit or not to chit. So why would you do that? Well, for one, it will allow the tubers to grow faster and produce a bigger crop. If they are not sprouted, so if you take a potato that's not sprouted yet, it will take much more time to grow and the crops might be reduced. So secondly, or thirdly, you can eliminate sprouting failure after planting. So many times if you put in your seed potatoes, you plant them in the ground, sometimes they don't sprout at all. So you never get anything. You could have a big rain, you could plant them too deep, or any other problem could cause it. But if you've got a sprout on your potato, it really ensures you're probably going to have a plant. They're going to be popping through the surface really quickly. You're not going to have to wait the 2 weeks. You may have to wait 2 days and it's going to come up. So it kind of gives you a jump start. And I'll show you something. Now, hopefully you can see this on the camera. So these are some potatoes we chitted, and you can see the sprouts are starting to come out right now. We did this about 2 weeks ago, and they're coming out, they're starting to look good. I've got another smaller one here. Can you see this, Ginger? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you can see the sprouts are happening. And normally if you buy your potatoes, they're not going to be sprouted at all. So it's going to have to take that time of a warming up in the soil, being moist. And then all potatoes are dormant for some period of time. So this is a process of breaking the dormancy of the potato. So how to chit? Chitting's really easy. You determine your plant date. You begin the process 3 to 4 weeks prior to planting. You identify the end of the seed potato with most of the eyes. So you see all of these are different eyes. And in general, the end of the potato that wasn't connected to the stolon is going to have the majority of the eyes. So you can see on this particular potato, this is where it was grown and where it was connected to the plant it was on. And you'll see most of the eyes are all on the opposite end. So that's pretty common. So you can place that in. So you would place this one down in an egg carton or even in a shallow open box as much as you can. And then you move the potatoes to a well-lit, warm location, but do not put them in the sun. So we'll talk about the sun a little bit later. The sun is terribly bad for potatoes, but if you put them in a well-lit area with daylight, and it's nice and warm somewhere in your home where it stays, in the 60s or 70s, it'll break the dormancy, the sprouts will start to happen. And then when you're ready to plant, your potatoes are just going to be ready to go.
We did have a quick question.
Okay, hang on a second. Okay, question. What form are the Gulf Coast Master Gardener potato plants for sale? Just seed potatoes or are they sprouting? They are just seed potatoes. So preparing the potatoes for planting. So you want to select an egg-sized potato for planting. I'll show you one. So this is about an egg-sized potato, 1.5 to 2 ounces, and that's about what this is. So you would plant this particular one, the whole potato. If the seed potatoes are large, like you see here, they can be cut into smaller segments. So you see on the diagram below on the slide, you would cut it in half to get them to be about a 2-ounce piece of potato. So you need to make sure each segment has visible sprouts. So if I were looking at this one and I see a sprout here, you've got a lot on the top, you would probably want to cut it across this part where you do have sprouts on both sides. There's some other sprouts here. So this potato could probably be cut into 2 or even 3 seed pieces to be planted. And this one here, when you get one this size, you'd plant the whole seed potato in the ground. So you need to, if you do cut it, you need to allow the cut pieces to cure for a few days before planting. And not doing so, you really, really raise your odds that the seed pieces are going to rot when you put them in the ground. So once you cut the potato, it's going to be very moist, it's going to be wet, and you need to let them cure so they harden over and they're going to resist rotting in the ground. So preparing them for planting and curing. So I want to talk a little bit more about what is that curing process. So one thing I strongly recommend everyone do before you plant a potato is you treat the potatoes with agricultural sulfur powder prior to planting. So the sulfur protects the cut potatoes from rot organisms. The sulfur will lower the pH to protect from potato scab. And the sulfur also acts as an insecticide to eliminate potato bugs. So those three things are three of the biggest reasons you won't be successful growing a potato. And just applying the agricultural sulfur for a couple days before you plant will really assist in that regard. This is a picture of potato scab. So I mentioned it, I just wanted to show it so you have in your mind. You can see on the potato these round lesions on all the potato, and it can get bad. They don't do anything to you. You can eat them. They're not harmful in any way, but this is pretty mild. It can get substantially worse than this. And potato scab is just a bacteria that's in the soil, and it can get progressively better. So putting any of the sulfur and lowering your pH resist it. So I know I got some questions, and I think I'm going to answer all of those questions with this next slide. So how to treat with agricultural sulfur powder. So the first thing you do, most feed stores have it, most garden centers have it. Actually, let me go back. And you'll see here, this is just a picture. It comes in small bags. You don't want to get a big bag. You won't use much of it. Make sure you do it outside. So you place your potatoes in a sturdy paper bag is typically how we would do it. You put about 2 tablespoons of agricultural sulfur in the bag with the potatoes. You shake the bag till all the pieces are coated, and you let it sit for a day or two before planting, making sure all the pieces have properly cured. So you'll clearly see the curing process. They're not going to be wet anymore. They're going to dry up, and they're going to kind of harden over wherever you cut it. When we sell, the master gardeners, when we sell at our sale, we will not only have the potatoes in the bag, but we will also have some small bags of agricultural sulfur in the potato bag as well. So you'll be ready to go. You get it home, basically cut up your potatoes, put your sulfur in the bag, and you should be good to go. Wait 2 days and you'll be ready to put it in the ground. So planting. You dig a trench 4 to 6 inches deep. It's typically what's done. You can see on the picture on the right. Make a big mound, dig a nice trench in the bottom. I know some people will dig it deeper than 4 to 6 inches, like maybe 8 or 10 inches, and then apply a little bit of fertilizer in the bottom and then cover it up, and then with dirt, and then put your potatoes on top. So you can do either one. I'm going to show you what I generally do. The potatoes should be planted 4 to 6 inches deep, sprout side up. So a key point here is if you go much deeper than 6 inches, you run the risk of them being in the ground too long without sprouting and rotting. Many times I've planted before and you just get a big old flooding rain right after you plant. And that's the worst thing can happen after you plant because it's all wet, it's moist, you got all the organisms attacking it, and they can rot easily. So you don't want it too deep, but you want it deep enough so that you have room for a lot of potatoes to form. So if you only plant your potatoes 2 inches deep, you're probably going to have a very, very small harvest. If you planted 4 to 6, that's your optimum zone to get the biggest harvest you can. Spacing should be 8 to 12 inches apart. If you space 12 inches, you will probably have larger potatoes. If you space 8 inches, you will probably have slightly smaller potatoes, but then you'll be able to grow more potato plants. So again, it's a decision you need to make. Would you rather smaller potatoes and more plants, or would you rather larger potatoes and less plants? So either can work, either is fine. So it's just a matter of what area you have, and if you have a desire for a larger potato or a smaller potato. I also, after I put my potatoes in, like you see on the picture to the right, I will also come back and add just a little dusting of additional sulfur to the trench. And that's more for just resistance to any bacterias and pests, as well as to lower the pH a little bit. If you lower the pH, you're going to resist scab, and it's really good for the potatoes to grow in a lower pH. And like I said, your standard garden soil is probably going to be more on the high side of around 6.5. So you cover with soil once you get everything in, like you see in the picture, but you'll allow for future healing. And I'm going to talk about healing in greater detail coming up. Okay, next question about a grow bag. Perfect timing. If you're planting them in a grow bag, it's the same method apply as if you're planting in a garden. So the potatoes should, once again, put them 4 to 6 inches deep, sprout side up, spacing again. I think in a grow bag, you probably want to move it closer together. So probably 8 inches apart is more appropriate. And make sure you cover it with soil, at least 6 inches deep, and then allow for future healing. So you're going to add some more soil after your potatoes sprout. So just be aware of that. And we'll talk about that some more. It's called healing. So fertilizing. Potatoes need adequate fertilizer early in the season. So you would apply most of your fertilizer just before planting. And the suggestion is to use 2 or 3 pounds or 4 cups of a complete fertilizer, such as 15-5-10 for a 30-foot row in bands 2 inches on each side or 1 inch below the seed piece. You can also use an organic type of fertilizer. You'll see down at the bottom, Microlife. So they have, it's called the multi-purpose 624, works just as well. It's a slow release. So either can work, your preference on what type of fertilizer you choose to use. Do not let the fertilizer touch the seed pieces. That can cause problems. So in general, what you do is apply your fertilizer in rows on the side of the seed pieces that you make a little trench. And then you apply, you put it about 1 inch below the seed piece and away from the seed pieces, cover it all up. And then after your plants grow about 4 inches tall, you apply another cup or basically about 1/4 of the amount of fertilizer, and then you're done. So you should be in good shape. No need to apply any additional fertilizer at the end of the process. So it's really just at the beginning at planting and right after the potato plants start to break the ground. So one question, what kind of soil for grow bag, heavy or organic matter? They love organic matter, so you definitely want some organic matter. It needs to be pretty light, loamy, but organic matter is great. I would also add, though, one thing to consider, be careful using any manures. Manures have a tendency to increase the opportunity that you'll get scab, or that scab will be bad. So if you're going to use manures, make sure your manures have been completely composted and they're not fresh, and you should be good. But organic matter is fantastic. They love organic matter, strongly encourage it. In fact, I always use compost in mine. So healing. Any of you guys who have grown potatoes before has heard the term healing, and I want to challenge a myth that I've heard for forever that is just not true. And we'll talk about it. But healing is the process of pulling up soil around the stems of potato plants. So you need to do this. Now, the myth is that you pull up the soil around the potato plants and it will encourage the plant to produce even more potatoes. That's not true. That can be true if you're planting indeterminate potatoes that continue to grow throughout a long growing season. But because we can only grow determinate potatoes that have a fixed growing season, hilling does not do anything to increase your production of potatoes. But hilling does have a great purpose, and it's to cover up your potatoes as they grow so that they do not see any of the sun and become contaminated. The sun greens up the potatoes and really turns them bitter, and they're actually poisonous after they green up. So you do want to hill. It's just not for the purpose of growing more potatoes, because that doesn't work. And my guess is that the myth traveled from doing it up north in the northern states, and then people coming down in the southern states thinking it would happen and work the same way here, but it doesn't. So determinate tomatoes in our short growing season doesn't allow this to work. So how do you hill? So the first hilling should be done when plants reach a height of 8 to 10 inches tall, leaving only the top of the leaves exposed. So you see my picture on the right. This was after hilling. There was probably about 10 inches of the potato that was exposed. And so I came back with my hoe on both sides of the row, and you pull up the soil around the potato plant. So what that does is, as I said before, the potatoes are going to grow all the way to the original dirt line. And as the potatoes grow, they expand. And so the top of the potato, if you didn't hill, all the tops of the potatoes, they would penetrate the dirt and they would be exposed to the sunlight. So the reason you're hilling is essentially to guard against any of the potatoes as they grow from being exposed to the sunlight. And like I said before, traditional deep hilling only benefits indeterminate varieties, not determinate whatsoever. And a caution, hilling too deep can kill the determinate varieties. So you don't want to pull up 4 and 5 inches of soil. You really just want to pull up a couple of inches of soil around the plant, around the base of the plant. And it's done just to protect exposed tubers from sunlight. So you should also do a second hilling. So what you see on the right is potatoes after a second hilling. And by the way, on containers, the same thing would be done. So if you do your first hilling, you would either add another layer of soil, 1 or 2 inches deep if you've got in a container, or you can either add a good layer of compost on the top, would be a great choice as well. So my second hilling, I generally like to cover it with straw or hay. Straw blocks the light, it blocks the weeds, and it allows the tubers to grow uniformly and provides easy and clean harvest. So you can even grab underneath the straw and you won't hardly have any dirt around your potato. It's just a clean harvest around it. And you know, the final thing I'll mention, if you take anything from what I've said before, the key to growing lots of large potatoes is growing lots of leaves. So you don't want to aggressively hill. You want to make sure you've got a lot of leaves exposed to the sunlight and you're growing a very, very healthy plant. Now, I'll make one comment about using straw and hay. If you're going to go that route, make sure you ask whoever you buy it from if their straw or hay was treated with an herbicide. It's back to the herbicide again. Many fields, before they harvest the hay, they spray the whole field with an herbicide, and then they come back and harvest it. And I can tell you, most of those herbicides will kill your potato plant, will kill your tomato plants as well. So it's kind of like the same general stuff as you get in weed and feed. And the weed and feed is horrible on potatoes as well. If you're doing your yard and you spray it into your garden area, your potato plant will die immediately from the weed portion of it. Same thing goes with tomatoes. So be very careful. Make sure if you do use straw or you do use hay, that they can tell you it was not sprayed with an herbicide that's still in the hay. Because the last thing you want at this point in time, after you've grown potatoes this far, is to all of a sudden kill your own potatoes when you're getting close to harvest. One question, can you use pine needles for hilling? Absolutely. Pine needles are another great choice. They also are fairly acidic, so that's probably another benefit of even using pine needles if you have access to them. So great choice, great idea. And again, like I said, popular to a false belief, hilling does not allow for additional tuber production on determinate potatoes. Potatoes are produced from just above the seed potato to where your dirt line originally was. That's it, no more. That's what you're going to get. So you can see on these two pictures where the dirt line was, and your potatoes are just under it. Your seed potato was below everything. In general, about the most potatoes you will get per plant is 8. I think if you got more than 8, it would be unbelievable. And probably 6, 7 is probably average. 8 every now and again. So and that's really all it can support. And what happens with the stolons, they go out horizontally, and the tubers grow from there. And as they grow, they also start to grow downward. The stolons start to bend downward, so they don't bend upward. But as the potatoes get large, they're still right at the surface of the soil. They can easily penetrate the surface if you don't hill, and then the sun will mess them up. Flowering stage. If you get to the flowering stage, you're at the home stretch, you will have potatoes. So potato plants usually produce flowers, and believe it or not, sometimes produce fruit. The potato bears the true seed of the potato. So, or the fruit bears the true seed of the potato. I said at the beginning, if you ask most people how a potato is grown, half would say it is grown from a seed, and the other half would say there are no seeds on potato plants. Well, there are seeds on potato plants. You can plant the seed of a potato plant, and it will grow a genetically unique potato. The benefit of growing potatoes from a seed potato is a seed potato is an absolute clone. The new potatoes will be an absolute clone of the seed that was planted, the seed potato that was planted in the ground. And the actual seed itself will be a completely genetically unique potato and could revert back to some traits of the parent potatoes that were involved in making the seed potato. I've grown potatoes for years and years, and I've never ever seen a seed. I've seen flowers often, but the seed is really rare. And most of the potatoes we grow here, all that was listed, they're partially sterile. And they're partially sterile, not that there's anything wrong with them, but they're sterile just because they bred them together that way. And it just evolved over time to not be very fertile. So if you're going to want to plant seeds of potatoes, which is probably a cool thing, I'm thinking about getting into starting doing that in the future, because you get a lot of different varieties, unique things. But if you're going to do it from a seed, you need to get a seed from a fertile potato variety. And then you need to make sure that variety is something that can grow in the South, because not all of the potatoes obviously will grow here. The seeds and the entire plant are poisonous. So the potato is part of the nightshade family, same as tomatoes and same as the tobacco plant. So the potato plant's defense is actually that it puts out, let me see, I wrote it down because I never can remember it. What is it called? Solanine. It produces solanine. That's the chemical that it produces. It produces it as its defense against pests, against bugs, but you cannot eat it. It'll make you sick. If you eat a lot of it, it'll really make you sick. And from everything I researched, the potatoes that we grow here have a low amount of solanine, So the odds of you really getting sick are probably limited, but more of the native and wild potatoes, they have very high amounts that can really, really make you sick. So just caution, you don't want to eat it. They can be poisonous. And when the flowers are present, you can begin to harvest a few new potatoes from the edges carefully with your hand. So, you know, like I said before, if you get to the flowering stage and you see flowers, you have potatoes. And what I like to do, instead of just harvesting all my potatoes in one day, is once I see flowers, then pick one of the plants, kind of reach your hand under there, pull the soil back, and you can pull out some small potatoes about the size, probably about the size of what I have here, new potato size. And you can start cooking them in your home and eating them. And you can harvest for probably a 6-week period, little by little, as you desire. You want to cook them or eat them. So that's what I like to do. And you just pull out a couple. Don't pull the plant up. Just reach your hand in there, grab a few. So they'll be at the top. You won't have to reach deep. And normally the ones at the top are the smaller ones. The ones deep down are going to be your larger potatoes. Okay, I had a question. What size pot do you use for your potatoes? So I would say the bigger the pot, the better, obviously. Don't use a little pot. They need room to grow, and also the roots need room to grow as well. So the largest pot that you can get, the better. So harvesting. Potatoes are ready to harvest when the tops begin to die back. And that's generally, depending on the variety, can be anywhere from 80 to 100 days from planting. One thing I recommend is to spot check a few plants prior to harvest so that you know what the size are. So rather than you just say, hey, tomorrow's my harvest day, you know, go out, pick one plant, dig under that plant, harvest that plant, and if all looks good, then harvest the rest. If they're kind of small, you might want to leave the rest in for another week or so. Once they produce the tubers, they grow really fast. So it doesn't take that long to get a much larger potato from day to day. They grow really quick once they're really gone. You also want to consider reducing the water 2 weeks prior to harvest. And what that does is allow the skins to begin to toughen up. So if you just dig up your potatoes today and you grab them, just your fingers grabbing the skins of the potato will pull the skin off. They're really, really delicate. But if you can reduce the water and you let them sit there a little bit, the skins will start to toughen up and they won't come off quite as easily. And again, either way, it doesn't really matter just because the skins come off. Maybe you don't want the skins, and then that just saves you time of having to peel them anyway. So harvesting, you know, the big thing I would ask or say here is, you know, just dig far away from them, 10 to 12 inches away from the plant, and you gently pull the plant up as you dig around it. So you don't really want to dig with your spade really close to the plant and then pull all your potatoes up. Kind of loosen the ground around it and pull the plant up, and you'll find most of the potatoes will be attached to the plant and you won't run the risk of cutting them and messing them up. Make sure your soil is slightly moist at harvest. You don't want it bone dry and you don't want it really wet. You really kind of want it in the middle. And then this for sure you need to do is lightly clean and allow the potatoes to dry in the shade prior to storage. So leave some of the soil on it. Don't pick your potatoes and bring it straight to your water hose with a high pressure nozzle and start to clean off all the dirt. All it's going to do is tear up your skin. It's going to mess your potatoes up. They're not going to have cured and dried up. So you want to basically harvest them, leave some of the dirt on, leave it in a shady area for a few hours with some dirt on, and then let them kind of cure for a little bit before you bring them into your garage or whatnot. You'll also notice if you buy any potatoes to grow, they always are covered in dirt. They're not cleaned at all. And that's really the best thing to do. You really want to clean them at a later date before you're ready to cook. Okay. Okay, it's a question. Why would I want to harvest all at once when I can just harvest as I want for a 6-week period as previously referenced? And that's a great question, and that's how I feel. You can do either, but I prefer to just harvest over a 6-week period. That way you kind of extend it. And also think about this, that your potatoes are not going to store that long, particularly here in a hot, humid area. So if you really grow a bunch of potatoes and you have to store them, they're going to start sprouting on you. So I think that really helps with the harvesting over a long period of time. So here shows, harvesting things out of a container. So best way to do containers is similar to what you would do in your garden area. Put your container over to the side, kind of loosen your dirt around and slowly pull up on your potato plant and pull the potatoes up versus getting, a shovel in there and really damaging your potatoes. So turn it over, pull it on its side, and you can pull them out. On the left side, you'll see this was actually my fall harvest this year. And this was probably 1 month shy of when I wanted to harvest, but due to the frost that we had really early in November, all the tops of my potatoes died, turned yellow, and they were done. So you can see, look at the top, there's some really small potatoes here. They were going well, but it needed another month. And in another month, these potatoes would have been 2 or 3 times that size. So the last month, they really grow fast. A little view of the harvesting. So you can see red Lesotas, and also the Kennebec. So good harvest, a lot of them. Like I said before, 10 pounds per seed piece. So that's a lot. You can easily, with 2 pounds of potatoes, probably get 20 to 40 pounds of harvest. So it produces a lot of food. Okay, what's the question here? How does the air pruning affect to grow bags impact potatoes? I don't know what air pruning is. Know what that is, Ginger? Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by air pruning. I'll come back to that one. In the winter, can you leave potatoes in the ground for storage? So you can leave them in the ground for a period of time, but you cannot leave them in the ground through winter. And the problem is going to be all the rain we get here. As they sit there, they're going to rot over time. So you don't want to do that. But you can leave them in the ground. Let's say, you were ready to harvest them one day. You can certainly leave them in the ground for a few weeks, maybe even pushing a month after the time of harvest. But you don't want to leave them much more than that. Last thing you want to do is have a big rain coming that floods them out, because you run the risk of insects getting to it, bacteria getting to it, the water rotting the potato. So it's just not a real good idea to do that.
There were 2 other questions.
Okay.
Further up. One is there a point where it is too late to harvest?
No, not really. What'll happen when you start when you see the harvest, and harvest will happen here. Like I said, it's 80 degrees on the ground temperature. You'll start to see the tops of your potatoes, they'll just turn yellow and they'll start dying back. And if you haven't grown potatoes before, I know in my first times, I'm like, oh my God, now my plants are dying. What's going on? They actually are dying, but they're not dying because you've done anything wrong. That's just their life cycle. So you'll start to see them turn yellow. You'll start to see the tops die off, and you can leave them in the ground till the tops die completely back. I've read a lot of people who, after it dies back, they like to cut the tops off and just leave a stem. And they do that and then leave them in the ground for a while. And they do that to let the potatoes cure a little bit, and the skins to harden off as well.
And then the next one is the slow harvest model. Would I harvest one plant at a time or some from each plant?
No, so you can do either. But I would say I typically harvest a couple from each plant and just get them at the top. and they'll be smaller. They'll be more the size of new potatoes. Or if you wanted, you could dig up, you know, the whole plant. But the problem with digging up the whole plant is you'll probably have a whole bunch of small potatoes. If you just get a few of the smaller ones, then you come back, all of those other smaller ones will now be larger later. So it's your choice though. I mean, there's no hard rules on it. I just think it's better from not having, you know, 40 pounds of potatoes that you have all at one time versus you may have a 40-pound harvest. And if you can harvest 20 pounds in the 6 weeks leading up to the big harvest, you've eaten 20 pounds worth, then you've got another 20 pounds to go later. So it kind of extends your harvest time in time where you don't have to worry about storage in your house or anything like that. You just harvest what you're ready to eat. So storage, and this will add a little bit of support to that comment. So after you harvest, you want to cure the potatoes by leaving them in an area of moderate temperature, high humidity, away from direct light for at least 10 days. I do mine in my garage. There's not much other choice. So when you dig them up, put them in a shady area that day, leave them in that shady area for a couple of hours, just so they kind of harden off a little bit and cure. Then you take them and bring them into, you know, whatever boxes or whatever you're going to put them in, and bring them into your garage or wherever you're going to store it, and leave them there for 10 days and let them cure. So what the curing will do is it just hardens them off and allows them to have the best opportunity to store longer. So after you cure it, after 10 days is over, you want to check for damage and remove damaged potatoes right away. So any cuts, if you see any green ends on it, you know, take that out, take that potato out. Any soft spots, take that potato out. What you don't want to have is any potatoes that are going to rot on your other good potatoes. So go through them, pick off the bad ones, pull those in your house. If you got green ends, cut them off. You can still eat it. If you have cuts, no problem. Cut that piece off. You can still eat them. So you want to eat any of the damaged potatoes first. And then after that, you can hand clean what's left for storage and put those, you know, refrigerator is the best storage for long term. That's not practical for most people. I know it's not for me. And if it's not available, you want to store it like in your pantry in a cool, dark, dry location. Good way to do it is in a flat box or maybe a good paper bag. The key is keeping them as cool as they can, as dark as you can, and as dry as you can. And they'll keep for a while. So pantry, garage, anything. Red potatoes don't keep as long as white potatoes. So potatoes can last as long as 6 to 8 months when stored in a cool location, which I'd say cool location is probably refrigerator. Over here, if you're going to harvest in May, you know, where's a cool location in Houston after May? There's not many. So it's really got to be a refrigerator, maybe your home, but even in your home, you're going to be in the 60s or 70s. So it's cooler, but it's still not cool. So storage temperatures above 40, they'll only last 3 to 4 months. So that's really what you can expect. Don't store potatoes near fruit. So don't put bananas or apples anywhere near them. They give off gases that can cause them to sprout. Conversely, I'd also mention if you were doing chitting, I meant to state that when I was talking about chitting, putting bananas or apples near your potatoes if you're going to chit also has the potential to speed up that process. So it kind of will break the dormancy faster and also will cause them to sprout. So, but after you store them, just keep them away from your fruit because that will definitely reduce their storage time. And save your spring potato harvest, some of them, for fall planting because fall seed potatoes are really hard to find. Most of the feed stores and garden centers don't have them in the fall. So I like to keep some of my seed potatoes, and it's kind of funny if you harvest them in May and you're going to plant again in September, they're probably at that time, at least mine are, they're starting to sprout in my cabinet at that time or in my pantry. So they're ready to go at that point in time. and already are self-chitting themselves without you having to do anything. So that's a benefit. And then, like I said, you really have a hard time finding them in the fall. Most places don't carry them. So insects, healthy plants literally are the best deterrent for insects. So you really want your plants to be as healthy as they possibly can be. Make sure they're watered consistently. The root structure of a potato is very shallow. So if we've got some very dry times, you need to make sure you're watering them, because they will dry up and it will inhibit growth very, very quickly. And also invite insects to come over. Keep the area weed free. You don't want your potatoes competing with weeds for nutrition. Apply a good mulch. It's great. We talked about, I think, in the second hilling acts as a hilling, but it also acts as a mulch for it. So it serves two good purposes. If you do have some eating insects, which sometimes you will have that, BT is a good choice as an organic insecticide for anything that's a chewing insect. And neem oil can also be very effective against potato bugs. Aphids, I see aphids sometimes, which is kind of interesting. So the potato plant's poisonous to people in most things, but there's still some bugs and some insects who it just has no effect on. But they don't have nearly the problems with pests as you would for other vegetable plants. So they're pretty easy to grow in the backyard. Diseases, again, there are several diseases. Same diseases as attack tomatoes. So, blight's a big problem with tomatoes. Scab is probably the biggest problem with potatoes. And again, with scab, stay away from fresh manures. Utilize sulfur as much as you can, because the sulfur will drop the pH in the growing zone, and that's a deterrent on scab. And like I said, treating it with a fungicide, that will aid greatly. Neem oil can be used, again, pretty effectively. And then crop rotation is really an effective deterrent to many diseases. And, that's a tough thing to do. I know I struggle with crop rotation. Tomatoes, potatoes, they're all part of the nightshade family. So, a lot of my garden is potatoes and tomatoes. So how do you rotate it when 2/3 of your garden are those two plants? It makes it real difficult to do, but you should try as best you can to rotate it. Like with scab, it's in the soil. It doesn't go away. It's natural. It's in every soil. What you want to do is just make sure that you don't increase the population of the scab significantly. And so rotation helps to keep the population in check. So make sure you are moving it around. Compost helps as well. So if you have new compost in, it makes your soil very alive. And that's always a plus for growing whatever you do. Is adding new compost every year is fantastic. So now I'll touch in with what do we do with these things. So I love cooking and I love eating, and I love eating fresh vegetables for sure. So I've got a couple recipes for you guys to think about. And I'd have to say the first one, I said this before when I did this presentation before, I'm a little embarrassed to put it up because, it's really almost not a recipe. A first grader can do this. But in all honesty, as I thought about the ways I like to eat potatoes, this is it. This is up there for me. The potatoes, the star of the show. It really highlights, if you do this recipe with a homegrown potato and you do the same thing with a store-bought potato, it is dramatically different in taste. So, it's simple. You just bring your water to a boil, you boil your potatoes, and you mix a couple of tablespoons of butter in a pot, mix the potatoes in, and then I like to add fresh herbs, rosemary, oregano, basil, parsley, dill, even green onions. It's as simple as it can do. Like I said, a first grader could do it, but this is, I just think it's amazing, and I love doing them this way. It doesn't take much time. And the star of the show is the potato. You really get to taste what a homegrown potato is all about. So pardon the lack of complexity on recipe number one, but It's a great way of preparing it. And the good news is, I think, depending on what herbs you have available at that time, there are different herbs available on fall potatoes, such as dill, than you might have in the spring potatoes, which maybe is more of basil and oregano and different things. So you can mix it up a little bit just because of the herbs that are in season. In the next recipe, this is probably my favorite way to prepare them. A little more complex though. They're called smashed potatoes. So again, you boil them just like you would do before. Now, I would also say in the first recipe, for me personally, I think the red potatoes are the best to do in just boiling with a little bit of butter and herbs. In the smashed potato recipes, I think the whites are probably a better choice. They're a little bit more creamy. They smash up a little bit better. And it's probably a better choice. So I like them better that way. So you boil the potatoes just like you would do before. You heat a large flat pot. I'm from Louisiana. I've got probably 10 different size black irons. That's pretty much all we ever cook in anymore. So I mix a little bit, a couple of tablespoons of butter with some good olive oil. You add the drained potatoes. Make sure they're drained. You don't want to bring in a lot of water, so make sure they sit and drain a bit. You put your pot, you heat it up with the olive oil and butter, and you put the whole potatoes in, and you take a spatula and you smash them flat. And then you sprinkle them with seasonings. I like to cook the bottom a little bit and then transfer it to the oven, 400 degrees, or even on broil if you're going to watch it. And you cook it until the tops become toasted and crispy. And for me, the inside of the potato is creamy and soft. And now you've got on the outside of the potato a nice crispy layer, almost like a French fry on the top. And it's just, to me, the best blend of both worlds on how to prepare a potato. And again, it's not fried. You're not doing anything bad. It's still a healthy alternative to preparing it. And we always top it with aioli. So last time I did the presentation, I got a lot of questions. What is aioli? So I've added to my presentation, and I'm using my shout out to my daughter. She's like the aioli king. So I'm putting her aioli recipe on the deal. It's really amazing, and it's a good thing to go with smashed potatoes. Basically a half cup of mayonnaise, and we prefer to use olive oil or avocado oil. They're healthier choices. A little bit of garlic. In fact, 3 cloves is probably not what we use. We normally use a lot. Most people wouldn't use as much as we used to cook. Some lemon juice, paprika, coconut aminos is kind of a healthy replacement for soy sauce. Doesn't have all the sugars or anything, and it's got a great taste, nice sweet taste. And then you can add either Creole Dijon mustard to it if you choose. It's a little bit more spicier flavor. And then you can also add your choice of herbs to it. You mix it all up, real easy to do, and you spread it on the top, and it's really a wonderful, wonderful complement to the potato. So that's it.